Hello, my name is Taylor Genezer, and myself and my partner Sean Stone have done our project on the Florida Panther. So the Florida Panther faces several key challenges, including limited habitat, insufficient prey, and low human tolerance. So habitat destruction and fragmentation and fatal car collisions pose the most significant threats to their survival, while intolerance from humans hinders their recovery. Additionally, potential habitats in southern Florida are under pressure from urban sprawl, residential development, road building, agricultural expansion, mining activities, and a lack of land use planning that considers the needs of these panthers. So some current areas of research to increase population numbers include genetic diversity, habitat use, and disease ecology. Researchers are monitoring the genetic diversity of the population through genetic sampling and health assessments, which has significantly increased since the introduction of Texas cougars in the 1990s. This was done to combat inbreeding depression. Recent findings indicate that this improved genetic health of the Florida Panther and has increased the population from an estimated 12 to 20 individuals to 100 to 230 individuals. Habitat use studies involve tracking Florida panthers with GPS collars and monitoring them with trail cameras to gain insights on their range and habitat preferences. These studies have revealed that panthers favor upland and wetland forested habitats, which is crucial for land managers and wildlife refugees aiming to maintain and protect their preferred habitats. So disease ecology research is focusing on monitoring health and monitoring for the feline leukemia virus, which first presented itself in 2017 or 2018. So monitoring programs have been put in place by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, or FWC. Their program, the Florida Panther Project, to learn more about the disease. Similar to habitat use studies, researchers are also utilizing GPS collars and trail cams to track panther movement and determine how the disease might spread. There have been a lot of past and present conservation efforts conducted to help boost the Florida Panther's population numbers. So habitat conservation and protection, habitat protection plans and regulatory tools have been implemented by public, private, and tribal lands to help conserve the Florida Panther. One habitat protection plan is called the Florida Panther Habitat Preservation Plan, and this was released in 1993. Councils and committees. An example of a council formed is the Florida Panther Technical Advisory Council, and this was established in 1983, and they serve as advisors to the FWC. Transportation improvements. One of the most successful wildlife crossings in Florida that has been built is located along a section of I-75 known as Alligator Alley. This has really reduced Florida Panther collision rates and mortality rates, along with other species. Monitoring and management, capture, and radio collaring work for the Florida Panther began in 1981 by FWC and by the National Park Service in 2001. A big part of conserving the Florida Panther is education and outreach. So programs like the Path of the Panther, which is an initiative by National Geographic, aims to raise awareness and support through education and storytelling. If you haven't seen the documentary, I highly recommend it. And a more current conservation effort includes the Florida Panther Recovery Implementation Team, which coordinates research and management activities.
Thanks, Taylor. I'm going to take over from here, and I'm going to start off with a recording from a conversation Taylor had earlier this month with Mark Danaher from the Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge.
As I mentioned, I'm the supervisory wildlife biologist on the Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge. The refuge is a relatively new refuge. It was established in 1989. It's approximately 26,600 acres and was specifically established to provide habitat and connectivity for the Florida Panther. Because you have to realize, back at that time, as I mentioned, I'm the supervisory wildlife biologist on the Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge. The refuge is a relatively new refuge. It was established in 1989. It's approximately 26,600 acres and was specifically established to provide habitat and connectivity for the Florida panther. Because you have to realize, back in that at that time, there was probably less than a dozen panthers existing in the wild. So the Panther Refuge, even though it doesn't meet the needs of even an adult female's home range, it serves as a critical connection point between adjacent conservation lands and ranch lands that surround the refuge. And so the refuge establishment came at a perfect time because one of the requirements of that widening was to install approximately, I think it was 22 wildlife crossings under I-75 when they were widening it, which was one of the largest implementations of wildlife crossings in the United States at the time. And in addition to the wildlife crossings, they fenced both sides of I-75 to funnel wildlife into the wildlife crossings and also prevent wildlife from getting out onto the roadways. But the Panther Refuge, serves as a critical link between Fakahatchee Strand State Forest to the south of the refuge, Picayune Strand State Forest to the southwest of the refuge, and 730 plus thousand acre Big Cypress National Preserve to the east. We have over 4.2 million contiguous acres of protected conservation lands, both public and private. So basically twice the size of Yellowstone National Park. But yeah, so my role, as I mentioned on the phone, is primarily geared towards, managing the habitats on the refuge to provide, valuable habitat for the Florida panther, its prey, and all of the other species of plants and animals that are found on the refuge. Most importantly, in addition, to managing the habitat, with good habitat comes good denning habitat for the Florida panther, good prey base for the Florida panther, and so it's the factory for the Florida panther, and especially females producing kittens in a safe area where rarely can they get out onto roadways and get killed because road mortality is the number one cause of mortality of the Florida panther, and followed by intraspecific aggression. We estimate typically 8 to 10 panthers use the refuge proper every throughout the year, because adult males have huge home ranges, practically 2 to 3 times the size of the refuge itself. But this past year, this year we had 4 females with kittens on the refuge, which is pretty unheard of. It's the first time I've seen it in the past 10 years. Because they do have such large home ranges, I mean, they'll utilize just about every single type of habitat that we have. The pine flatwoods communities are probably the most valuable, most important, followed by hardwood hammocks, mixed hardwood hammock communities. But yeah, so that's prime denning habitat for a Florida panther, is that dense saw palmetto understory, and the pine flatwoods really offer valuable habitat for hunting, their primary prey being white-tailed deer. Probably the most challenging aspect of panther conservation in general, public acceptance, of a large predator like the Florida panther. We have huge challenges, with land management activities like prescribed burning. Fire and hydrology are 2 of the biggest ecosystem drivers of our ecological communities in South Florida. It's always an ongoing challenge to manage our fire-dependent habitats like the pine and flatwoods that I mentioned earlier, because they are dependent upon fire. You take fire out of those pine flatwoods, hardwoods, exotic invasive species, and other problem plant species will take over those habitats. The habitat management aspect, and also that public acceptance, are probably two of the biggest challenges for the Panthers' continued survival and the expansion of the Florida Panther throughout the state of Florida.
Promise that Mark isn't as nonstop as we made him sound. That's just the result of trying to condense a 20-minute conversation down to 5 minutes. A few facts about the Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge that Mark didn't mention that we thought were worth sharing include the refuge-specific goals, which include providing optimum habitat conditions for the Florida panther, which he did mention, restoring and conserving the natural diversity, abundance, and the ecological function of refuge flora and fauna, conducting research, monitoring, and evaluations to improve management of flora and fauna on the refuge and within the South Florida ecosystem, developing appropriate and compatible wildlife-dependent recreation and environmental education programs, and promoting interagency and private landowner cooperation for the protection and management of natural and cultural resources within Southwest Florida. All of which I think Mark kind of alluded to, but the pace at which we had to fast forward his conversation may not have been able to highlight that appropriately. And the refuge is important because it sits in the heart of Florida panther breeding territory. Refuge habitat is, as Mark mentioned, characterized by expansive forests, swamps, and lush subtropical vegetation that supports over 700 species of plants. Its continued preservation and management, in conjunction with the adjacent protected lands you can see on this slide in the darker green polygons, is of critical importance to the continued survival of the Florida panther. Taylor shared some information about the threats the species faces, and Mark expanded further on several of those. With the information they both shared, we'd like to ask you to reflect on what the most important preservation strategy is for preserving Florida panther populations. I'd like to share with everyone a handful of articles and reiterate Taylor's recommendation to watch Path of the Panther on Disney Plus if you have time. To spice up this week's discussion, I have a secondary question to pose regarding the introduction of 8 Texas pumas into the Florida panther breeding population in 1995. Since then, the population has increased, but was this introduction genetic restoration or genetic dilution? I'm curious as to your thoughts. Thanks for listening. We hope you found this as interesting as we did.